Hello, my name is Marissa, and I will be discussing Grand Street, located in Hoboken, New Jersey. So today I'm going to start with the health risks associated with mercury exposure, and then talk about the facts related to the Grand Street site, as well as go on to speak about the EPA response and the cleanup to the mercury contamination found at Grand Street. The objectives of this PowerPoint are to give an overview of sources of mercury hazards in the U.S., to learn about the actionable steps taken by the EPA to clean up Grand Street, and as well as to understand the impact of Grand Street. So this figure summarizes the most common causes of mercury exposure in the US. The number one most common cause of mercury contamination or mercury poisoning is due to methylmercury, which the main source of that would be through the ingestion of fish and shellfish. And although it's not healthy to have high levels of mercury at any time, at any stage of life in most humans, it is most pronounced risk within pregnant and breastfeeding women due to the risk it poses to fetal and infant neural development. Oceans, rivers, and bodies of water are sinks for mercury, and therefore the aquatic environment plays a really crucial role in the cycle of mercury. And this is a process known as biomethylation, and by which methylmercury can accumulate in fish and shellfish. Secondly is elemental mercury, which is what we will be discussing today, and that is most commonly found through the inhalation of mercury vapor from damaged product or release from a container. So thermometers, light bulbs, things of that nature. And that may cause tremors, emotional changes, neuromuscular changes, or in more extreme exposures, kidney and respiratory failure, as well as death. And lastly, and the least common of the three, would be other inorganic mercury compounds. So, for example, ingesting water contaminated with inorganic mercury can also cause fairly severe health symptoms. So with this image, we begin to discuss Grand Street, which is located in Hoboken, New Jersey. This is a map of Grand Street and gives the site boundary per the 1 mile buffer zone, along with a table of the demographic characteristics of the region. So the site was a former industrial building that manufactured mercury vapor lamps, mercury containing switches, and also used vacuum pumps which contained mercury. The site was operational from 1910 to about 1965 and was operated by General Electric Vapor Lamp Company, as well as General Electric Company and the Cooper Hewitt Electric Company, after which point it was sold in 1955 to the Quality Tool and Die Company, which manufactured tools, and was eventually sold in the early 1990s to the Grand Street Artists Partnership, GSAP. And they converted the buildings on the premises into residential living, as well as an office space. And residents began to move into the building in 1994. It was discovered during the renovation of a fifth floor unit in January 1995 that there was substantial mercury contamination in the building. Specifically, puddles of mercury were observed in the subfloor of the fifth floor apartments. Here we see the urine mercury levels among 31 residents of Grand Street, and it's a varied spread of samples, but you can see that there are a considerable number of residents who had very high mercury levels. Initially, the Grand Street Artists Partnership had hired an environmental company to perform remediation for the mercury contamination on the fifth floor. But in November 1995, another resident reported suspected mercury contamination on the fourth floor. This time, the Hoboken Board of Health detected mercury levels in the air that were far exceeding the EPA standards. In addition, in December 1995, Hoboken Board of Health and Hudson Regional Health Commission collected the urine samples from 31 residents, and these are them, to analyze the presence of total mercury, specific gravity, and creatinine. This figure depicts the breakdown of hazardous mercury levels in those urine samples from 31 residents. And as you can see, nearly 70% of residents had mercury concentrations exceeding 20 micrograms per liter, which is the amount that is allowed in an unexposed adult. In addition, 5 of the 6 children whose urine samples had been obtained also exceeded 20 micrograms per liter. After the test results were shared, all the residents were evacuated from the building and were relocated by the US EPA by January of 1996. In addition, this figure shows the different mercury air samplings at the different floors of the building, with 4 and 5 having the highest readings. But it was also suggested that cracks and holes in the floor were found, and mercury contamination likely migrated beyond the 4th and 5th floor, which would put all residents at risk for mercury hazard. And that can also be further supported by the fact that nearly 70% of residents did have substantial mercury contamination. In December of 1996, the site was proposed for inclusion on the National Priorities List and was eventually added in September of 1997. The cleanup initially consisted of relocation of residents and a thorough investigation to determine the extent of the mercury contamination. This informed the actions of the long-term remedy, which was decided that the structures could not be remediated for residential use, and the buildings were demolished. Contaminated soil was excavated and disposed of securely, and all hazardous waste was removed, including one container, which was determined to be RCRA hazardous waste. After these steps were completed thoroughly, the site was eventually purchased by private entities, and as this photo demonstrates, it was actually bought in 2007, and residential buildings were constructed on the site, which can be seen today. In summary, elemental mercury contamination is a health hazard, and this site underscores the importance of the EPA and the monitoring and regulations they put forth to ensure that sites such as Grand Street can be used in the future safely. Thank you.